could Nick Saban do this to you? How could he do this to us? How could he leave college football in such a state of disrepair? College football's got a lot of issues right now. Now, we're not going to talk about them by name, only because I promised you guys earlier today we're not talking about those things that are dominating the headlines everywhere else by name. Why? Because deep down, I get the sense you're tired of it and you don't want me talking about it. It's your show, it's not my show. So we hit the redirect button, and I come in today, and Jesse had texted me, I was in traffic, and he said, boy, do I have a stat for you. Now, normally when Jesse promises something, he underdelivers. It's when he doesn't say anything that I get pleasantly surprised. Well, today, he kind of hit it out of the park, I got to be honest with you. So Stats and Info, elsewhere referred to as Jesse, hits me with this stat today. He looks over in the SEC West. I tweeted it out. Here's the screenshot. Since 2007, there have been more head coaches in the SEC West than there have been Alabama losses. Mind-blown emoji. I should have stopped and let it sizzle for a second, but if you just want to stare at it in disbelief, it's on my Twitter account, @LateKickJosh. Nick Saban came in here in 2007, and he set a new standard in college football. Some people tried to match it. Infinitely more people just decided they were going to scream and wail and try and change everything about the sport to slow him down. And now you've had college football expansion once and maybe again. You've had NIL open up. You've had offenses open up. You've had the transfer portal open up. You got a lot of stuff that is it's not directly tied to Nick Saban, but I would make the solid argument that if that man, Nicholas Lou Saban, had not come to Tuscaloosa by way of Miami, Florida, which we're about to get into in a second, I would guarantee you half to over half of the problems, as many of us call them in today's sport, would not be at least at the forefront of all the conversation. So I am thinking about this since producer Jesse puts that mind-blowing stat in front of my face, and I wanted to know how much of this is really on Nick Saban. How much of what's happening around us was just reactionary and then ripple effect off the reactionary to Nick Saban coming to Alabama. Butterfly Effect, it's a good movie starring Ashton Kutcher, who we also bumped into at the Iowa State game. 6 degrees there. But Butterfly Effect is also part of chaos theory. So let me read you something. Very clearly, I don't have this memorized. Butterfly Effect. Most of you know, but we got a sharp audience. For the few of you who are new amongst us, former casuals, soon to be the enlightened, let me tell you about Butterfly Effect. Sensitive dependence on initial conditions in which a small change in one state of a deterministic nonlinear system can result in large differences in a latter state. Translation: Miami Dolphins doctors don't clear Drew Brees. Saban doesn't get his way in Miami. He's saddled with Dante Culpepper, and whomst amongst us hasn't been there and unhappy a time or two in our lives, and he jets, quite literally, on the private one with that script A on the tail, and he bolts for Tuscaloosa, and he comes to Alabama. Now, I just ask you this. It's unknowable, therefore it's infinitely fun to talk about. What happens if I don't change anything else about the past other than the Miami doctors clear Drew Brees, Saban gets Drew Brees, he gets his quarterback at Miami, and goes on to do whatever he does there? Well, certainly he's not coming to Alabama, because at the very least, he would have been happy one more year, and that's when Alabama had their opening. So that's not the way it happened. We all know that. He comes to Alabama. Now, a lot of you remember, but as I said the other day on the Late Kick Extra podcast, which I thought was one of our better episodes, to be real with you, and a lot of you agreed, some of you didn't, that's fine. I said the other day, we've got a really big high school and college audience. It's our biggest chunk demographic. The 18 to 34 is really big for us, but that 18 to 24 is really big for us, and that's great. And if you don't believe me, ask advertisers. A lot of you don't remember 2007. Sometimes I forget this, but you don't really have a vivid recollection. It wasn't like you were tuned in, like you were worried about what breakfast cereal you were going to get in 2007. You weren't really worried about the state of college football. Well, when Nick Saban came in, let me remind you what happened. A lot of people freaked out. They lost their mind because they were scared of Urban Meyer at Florida. That's what they were terrified of. And then Saban comes in, and in his second year, they go toe-to-toe in Atlanta with Urban and Tebow, and they lost. But then the year after that, Saban and Bama beat Tebow again and Meyer again. And then the Florida program just goes up in smoke. And Saban and Alabama are off to the races, and you see what's happened. They haven't slowed down. So a lot of people freaked out. And instead of adopting the mentality of, ooh, this guy's really brought a different standard to the game, looks like we're going to have to really roll our sleeves up and match it, you had a lot of people saying, what can we do to stop him? Pathetic, beta, but that's what a lot of people did. Here's what it's the equivalent of. So imagine you're in sales. I know we got a lot of salesmen and women in our audience because I get the metaphors from you guys all the time. And one of you didn't necessarily give me this one, but I made it up with you in mind. So you're sitting there and your sales team is rolling, but then a new guy, a Danny Cordray, for those of you familiar with The Office, he rolls into town and he just starts lighting it up and he's number one on the leaderboard in the office every day. Now you could look at it and you could say, boy, we got our work cut out for us. Or you could move his desk, try and throw him off. But the problem is he just put him more in isolation, therefore he focuses more on his work and he's surging even further ahead of you guys. So then what do? Naturally, you slice his tires. But the problem is he just calls Uber, and then in the process of being taken to the rental car company, he also converts the Uber driver into a new client. Therefore, he made a sale even in the darkest of times. So then what do? Well, you absolutely have to go with the next logical step, which is you just shift the offense currency to the Japanese yen. He learns Japanese. He has a whole new market in the Pacific Ocean that you don't have access to. And so you keep making these moves, and the guy keeps one-upping you. And so eventually, one day you just see him trip and fall in the office. You and I are watching this, and we see him trip and fall. And previously, this guy was like a mythical creature to us. He's like a dragon. We can't slay him. But then you look at his knee, and what is that? That's blood. Just like every other human, he bleeds. He's human. He's mortal. And then, if you and I were merely observing, if we were just voyeurs in this whole equation, we would say, hold up. This guy is not a superhero. He's just like you and me. The only difference is he's performing at a higher level. Why don't you guys just outwork him? Why don't you just raise your collective game? That's what I would say if I were observing. And that's what, if I were not a college football fan, I would say about this sport right now. I would look and I would see how many tumblers have been put in motion, really, if you trace it back, because of people freaking out about one man, one guy, maybe the greatest of all time, one guy. And I would say, instead of throwing your sport into a wood chipper because you guys had a pretty good thing going, why don't you just up your game and beat him? And it has happened, by the way. Dabo's done it twice. Gus Malzahn got it done several times. It's not like they're immortal. It just takes doing a really, really good job and sustaining a high level of performance. But I want you to think about this sport for just a second, because you may be thinking to yourself, how do you tie all this in? Well, not directly, but think about the college football playoff. Before Saban got to Alabama, and even when they won their first title in 2009, that was the 10th different championship team in a 12-year span. All that competitive balance you guys want. We had it in college football. Had Saban not come to Alabama, it very well may have continued on that track. But when Saban came to Alabama, that first one he won in 2009 was followed by another one in 11 and another one in 12, and especially the one in 11 precipitated the playoff more so than anything because it was SEC versus SEC. If Saban doesn't come to Alabama, do we get that headline that morning? College football playoff is coming. Maybe, maybe not, but I can tell you this, even if we did get the college football playoff, because you could argue with me, we were already on the way to that. Okay, devil's advocate here, I'll grant you that. We certainly would not have moved into the expansion talk so fast because there would have been no program out there as dominant as Alabama. The entire call and cry for expansion was because of what they were doing. They were there every year, which a blind man could have seen coming, but they were there every year with the transfer portal. It's not that old, but remember when the transfer portal was first instituted, a lot of people don't want to own these statements now, but a lot of folks out there who had 6-foot vision instead of 6-year vision on this stuff, they said, well, Nick Saban's dominated because he's always had superior depth. And he's had that because they always recruit a top 2 or top 3 class, most years number 1, and they just keep stacking them and stacking them and stacking them. And kids that would start at other programs are running with the 2s and 3s there. So when the transfer portal gets instituted, people say this is going to knock Bama down to size because no longer are they going to be able to hoard all those 4 and 5-star kids on the 2s and 3s on the depth chart. Well, that's true. That was true. They've lost some guys. Here's the problem. There was a downside you didn't think of. No, they're not hoarding their 2s and 3s. Their 2s and 3s weren't as safe as they used to be. Your 1s weren't as safe either, were they? Where's Jahmyr Gibbs playing his college football next year? Where's Eli Ricks? Where's Jermaine Burton? Where are they playing their college football next year? In fact, every addition that Bama has made in the transfer portal, has it really led the locals in Tuscaloosa to miss anyone who's left the program? As he said, he being Nick Saban here, as he said at the outset, We're probably going to lose some good players. We're going to take some great players. And they have. Boom. Move on. The entire offensive evolution in this sport. If you really think back to 2013, 2014, people thought they had the book on Bama. I mean, smart people can say stupid things sometimes. Stupid people don't really say smart things. But there were a lot of smart folks in our space that saw, Gus Malzahn beat Saban in 2013, and they saw Hugh Freeze a couple of times end up beating Nick Saban. And what did they start to say? We got his kryptonite. We got Bama's kryptonite. It's the RPO game. It's the mobile quarterback. It's the new up-tempo offense. And the college rules with the 3-yard downfield instead of 1-yard downfield for linemen, it lets us do a lot of things, and it did. And Saban gave that famous quote, is this what we want football to be? Is this what we want college football to be? Which was the warning, of course. That's kind of old hat now to say. But he said it, and then everyone else kind of laughed and had the audacity to say, yep, he's threatened. He's cornered. Look at him. He's vulnerable. Some people even suggested the sport had passed him by and Bama had peaked. All he did was remind you he can have the best of anything. He has his choice. Some places have to run specific offenses or run their program in a specific way because it's the only path. Saban can take any path. He gets the luxury of choosing how he wants to run his program. So all he did was say, I'm going to do the same things you're doing to me, only I'll have better athletes, and I'll be able to hire the best coordinators and coaches in the country and analysts, and I'll be able to do you better than you can. And also, the side effect, the byproduct was it ended up attracting the top quarterback, wide receiver talent in the country, and all of a sudden, instead of having to defend Jake Coker, all due respect, you had to defend Tua, and you had to defend Bryce Young, and even the guys running on the 2s and 3s that ended up being ones like Mac Jones just lit you up. Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, like those guys weren't coming to Alabama in droves like they are now. Every change that has been instituted, at least in part because of his presence, has ended up being a benefit for Alabama and a net loss for the rest of college football. Now, here's the counter that you could make, and you would be accurate. You could look at me and you could say, you're talking about Saban here. But a lot of the problems with NIL and the portal being on fire right now and all this mess we're dealing with, that's because the NCAA drugged their feet. That's because the NCAA failed to act when they should have acted. And you're right, and I agree with that. What I'm trying to counter with is even if all that remained the same, even if the NCAA did drag their feet like they have been known to do and like they did here, but Nick Saban didn't arrive at Alabama, I'm a believer that half to 3/4 of this stuff we talk about a lot would never have happened because there would not have been a hard enough push to institute it because you wouldn't have had one program seemingly running roughshod over the sport. So here's what I want to remind you before you make any further drastic steps to change the sport fundamentally forever. He is human. It's possible to beat him. It's not easy, but it's possible. But even if you can't beat him, he won't be here forever. The sport, theoretically, should be here long after Nick Saban's gone, unless you destroy it in the process of trying to rid college football of Nick Saban. Get Nick Saban out the door, and then you look back and you see just a plume of smoke above college football, and you look in the mirror and say, what have we done? Couldn't be me. I'm out. I'm innocent on this.